I'm your host, James Drummond with Codenvy. Thank you for attending Conference 2016. In this session, our presenter, Quinn Slack with Sourcegraph, will be sharing with you his presentation on language server protocol.
Okay, thank you, James, and thank you, Tyler. Thanks to everyone for setting this up, and I see a bunch of people who are following along. So looking forward to sharing about language server protocol with all of you. So I'm going to, you can see my screen now, and we'll be posting slides and links so you can go and contribute and check in later. But let's get it kicked off. So I'll be talking about the language server protocol, and I'll be talking specifically about what it's going to do for Che, why it's going to make Che more awesome. So, one really important thing with an editor, with a cloud workspace, is that it needs to support the language that your team uses. And the way that Che will support every language in the world is LSP. I'm going to talk about what is LSP. I'm going to talk about what it looks like if you want to build a new language server, or if you just want to use Che for one of the programming languages that your team uses. And I'll also talk about some other uses of language server protocol out in the wild other than Che. One of the amazing things about language server protocol is it was just introduced in June 2016 by Codenvy, Red Hat, and Microsoft, and it's already gaining a lot of traction, and that's what's going to make it successful. So who am I? Again, my name is Quinn, and I'm the CEO of Sourcegraph. We're the Google for code. We make a product that is the best way to read code, and we also use language server protocol. We're also enthusiastic Che users. So it's great to see this community growing really quickly, and it's amazing to see the first conference of Che be so successful. So I'm going to do a quick demo of Che and show some of the awesome things about it, and keep a special eye out for the language support. So here I am in Che, and this is one of my projects. Can you imagine if Che didn't have the ability to do this type of autocomplete? It's crucially important to have this. And you can see a lot of other language intelligence in Che. You can see documentation for anything in the project, for anything in the standard lib. And basically you would not be able to program if you didn't have this type of language intelligence. It just needs to work. It's really table stakes for an IDE. Also have things like jump to def and so on, and it just works. And so that is crucially important for Che to be successful as a cloud workspace. So that's awesome. You saw that work for Java. And how do we make sure that Che has world-class support for Java? To make Che support Java extremely well, one person who's working on Che has to write support for one language, for Java. But it turns out Java is not the only language that people use. So, if your team uses Python, then you need Che to support Python as well. And how do we make sure that Che has world-class support for Java and Python? Well, someone needs to go and write Python support. And, it's only 2 languages. Che has a really big community, so maybe that's possible. But then your team starts using C++. And how do you make sure that Che has world-class support for all 3 of these languages? Well, you have to go do some more work. And at this point, you're probably thinking like, well, there are all these other editors, and there are all these other workspaces, there are all these other language tools, there are all these other CI services that have gone and supported these languages. It seems like a lot of repetitive effort. And then, you get into a world where you want Che to be used by anyone in the world. That's one of the goals of Che. And so it needs to work for any language. And so, Che could get a lot of people all around the world and write language support for every single language, but that's a lot of work. And, Che's mission is to make it easy for anyone to code. And people use other tools than Che occasionally. People use things like Sourcegraph to read code. People use CI services. People might be using old-fashioned editors for some things. And you want the same language support to exist everywhere. So how do we make sure that every single tool you use has world-class support for every single language? And the big problem here is just that there's so much work. This is a matrix, and this is one way to visualize the problem of getting really good language support in every single tool that you use. Up at the top, you see all the different tools that you might want to use. And when you use them, you want them to support the languages that you care about. And on the left, you see the languages. And I've just numbered the cells to show how many individual pieces of code, how many individual plugins you'd have to build if for every single tool you had custom language support for it. And even with this small subset of languages and small subset of tools, we're already getting to 42 projects that we'd have to create, 42 plugins. That's just a lot of work. And frankly, that's why most programmers don't have fantastic language support in all of the tools they use. So, if you want to see this firsthand, go and ask people on your team if they have jump to def in every single language that they use, if they have find all references in every single language that they use, and so on. And we actually created something called the Sourcegraph test, which is a quiz, kind of like that Joel Spolsky test saying, do you have CI, do you do usability testing? But this Sourcegraph test is about, do you have all of these basic developer human rights functionality in all of your tools? So you can go and take that and see how you stack up. We want to make it so that every single programmer in the world has jump to def, find all references, refactoring, rename, all of those things, because every developer deserves that. And we don't want to get there by creating tons and tons of individual plugins like this for every single language and every single tool. But this is the state of the world. At Sourcegraph, we had been thinking about this problem. Microsoft had been thinking about this problem. And Codenvy has been thinking about this problem. And how do we make every single tool support every single language? And this is the language server protocol. So released in June 2016 by Codenvy, Red Hat, and Microsoft. And we at Sourcegraph are also participating a lot. And this is the promise, that any developer is going to be able to use any tool for any language they care about. What this looks like under the hood is a really simple protocol. You send a message from the tool to a language server. The language server is something that you write that's specific to each language. And for example, if you want every tool to support Java, then you would write one Java language server. That Java language server would respond to some of these requests. So text document did open. That is where the tool sends over the file contents to the language server. Now down a little bit more where it says user executes go to definition. The way that works is the editor would just send over to the language server a message saying, what is the definition for the cursor position here in this file? And the language server would just send back a file name and a cursor position where the user should be taken. Really simple. It's not complex. It does not try to be extremely smart at the protocol level. And the beauty of language server protocol is that it's a very simple protocol. And that's important for making it easy to get every single tool to support LSP and to make every single tool support every single language. So the full specification for the language server protocol is on GitHub, and I'm going to paste a link to that right now so that you all can take a look. So I just pasted a link in the chat, and that is Microsoft's language server protocol repository with more information. And so what this does here is as a reminder, the problem is to make every single tool support every single language, there's just a ton of work. With language server protocol, it collapses the problem space. Instead of having to fill in every single cell, you do one piece of work for every tool, which is the LSP client adapter. That's what tells the editor how to speak LSP. It doesn't care what language is on the other end. And on the left, you have to write a language server for every language. And that's definitely some work, but the community needs to do it once, and it'll work for every single tool. And so in the past, where it took 42 individual plugins to support these languages and tools, now it only takes 13. I've numbered them along the top and then down at the bottom. And that means that each individual tool here, each individual language here is going to get a lot more attention. It's not one person who might be a Che contributor, and that person is going to go and write support for 5 languages, but they're not an expert. It's the experts for Go, the experts for Java, the experts for Python are going to write language support once. That's going to be extremely high quality, and everyone will benefit from that. And this is how language server protocol helps not just Che, but every single tool. And I want to show a really clear case of how this is already helping Che. At Sourcegraph, we use Go a lot, and we wanted Go support in Che naturally because it's really important to have language support for the languages that you use. So I'm going to show how we added Go support to Che, and I'm going to announce the availability of the Go language server for Che and for anyone else who uses LSP. So I'm going to run through, this is what it looks like if you want to actually build a language server. Now, there are only about 25 commonly used programming languages in the world, so most people in the world will never need to write a language server. But I assume that because you're watching this presentation, you're interested in how these things work, and there might be a lot of people who are watching now who would actually build a language server, given that you're all early adopters. So we write a Go language server, and our Go language server is open source. You can see the link down at the bottom. And as I said, the language server responds to simple messages like this. You can see the handlers for the definition request and for the hover request, which shows the documentation tooltip. And we write it in Go so that we can take advantage of Go's functionality for understanding its own source code, parsing, and so on. So we write this project, and this is a completely separate project from Che. You can go check it out. The next thing, to make it work in Che, there's a little bit of work we have to do to plug it in. We create a Che workspace agent, which is just a JSON file. Very simple, and it follows a standard. You can see how those are done for the existing languages. And what it basically does is it creates a Docker image that has an entry point that is this Go language server. So no complex stuff. It's really just programs that speak a protocol, and that program can be written in any language. And next, when you're creating a stack, you just want to add the Go language server to the stack so that it is included in the agents that get started. And you can do this once. If you are the person managing Che for your whole team, then you just add it to the stack that your team uses, and everyone will benefit from that. You do it once, and everyone else has that one-click access to a workspace that supports Go. Once you've done that, then you create the workspace, and that's it. And now you have Che, but with Go support. So I'm going to show what this looks like. It's going to look a lot like what we just saw with Java, but it's Go, and that's exactly the way it should be. You shouldn't have to think about, does my tool support the language that I use? It should just work. So here I'm hovering over some things, and it just works. It's really quick. Nothing is pre-computed. I have all of the code intelligence features, just did jump to def, and can jump to def a lot. It just works. And Che doesn't need to know a lot about Go. It relies on the language server for knowing about Go, which is beautifully simple. Find all references, I can open up down there, and I can jump through what are all the references to this token type thing, just as I would in Java. And it just works. It works exactly like you'd expect. And this is how every language should work in every single tool that you use. So that is Go support in Che. And we will be, we have released the repository. We'll be releasing this, and this will be merged into the main branch of Che. Here's just a call out that shows specifically some of the features in case you didn't catch that on the video. So boom, you have a new language added to Che that opens up massively the number of people in the world that can use Che. And if it was this easy to add support to Che for a new language for Go, then it's not that hard to think of how Che will grow to support every single language in the world. One of the important things about language server protocol is that it's not just associated with Che. Everyone in the community can use it. Every tool can benefit. And that's why we are adding support for Go to Che. We use Che, but one of the big incentives that we have at Sourcegraph, why we did all this work, is because we wanted a Go language server for our own tool, for Sourcegraph. And so this incentive structure is really important, and that's how we're going to get LSP to have the best language support for every language, because there is a lot of work to do. So I'm going to show how that same exact Go language server also works on Sourcegraph. So I'm going to pull up Sourcegraph, and here we are on Sourcegraph. We're looking at the exact same code base that we were just looking at. And again, Sourcegraph is a way to read and understand unfamiliar code. We've gone and indexed all of the code on GitHub so that you can, when you're browsing GitHub, find where is everywhere in the world that this type or this function is being called. You can get usage examples. It's tremendously helpful. And we also have a Chrome extension that gives you all of this inline while browsing GitHub. And this is the same file that we were just looking at. It's the same exact Go language server. And that means that we built amazing Go language support for our own purposes, and now everyone in Che can benefit as well. And that's exactly how the world is going to get really good language support for every single tool. Here's find references like we just saw, again, using the same underlying intelligence. One of the neat things is, at Sourcegraph, just like with Che, we want to support every language as well. And so we are not stopping with Go. We are adding language servers for more languages. And here we see a TypeScript repository. So you can see here, this is TypeScript, and we have support for TypeScript in beta on Sourcegraph. We're working on the TypeScript and JavaScript language servers, and we hope to use that to bring really good standard TypeScript and JavaScript support to Che as well, and also to every other tool that uses LSP. So we're really excited about that. And if you want to see what is all the progress going on in the language server world, you can pull up the protocol implementations. These are all of the language servers that have been built, and I'm about to paste a link to this in the chat. You can also see some of the other editors that are supporting it. You see Che right there. And at Sourcegraph, we also made a community site that we'll be working with the Eclipse Foundation on, which goes into a little bit more detail about what are all of the language servers out there, and specifically what is the progress of them, what do they implement, and what is a work in progress. So you can see tons and tons of community traction around this effort. And again, it was started in June 2016, so it's very recent. It's clear that this is the successful effort, very successful effort, and that eventually every language is going to have a language server. In fact, I believe that in 2 years, if you're a programmer and you're using an editor, then you're most likely going to be getting language support via LSP. And programming languages and those communities are going to feel that it's their responsibility to create the language server, because that's how they make their programming language be usable by a lot of people. So again, this is a tremendous effort with a ton of traction, and it's exciting to see it in Che. It's exciting to see it on Sourcegraph. And I think it's going to take over the world, make developers' lives so much better. So to recap, how does LSP make Che a lot more awesome? So you saw the demos, you saw the Java language support, and then you saw how easy it was to add support for Go and for other languages to Che. And that means that Che will support every language your team uses in a world-class way. It will have the best language support because it's going to use the same language support that every other tool uses. And you don't want Che having custom language support for one language. You want it to use the best, the most broadly used language support. Also, a lot of companies use custom domain-specific languages to write specific applications to their business. And until now, that's been hard to get support for in your editor. But if you write a language server for your custom DSL, then you can make anyone using any tool able to use that custom DSL. And finally, and this actually ties into the talk right after, it's really important that if you on your team set up your tools, your editors in the right way, that everyone else on your team can get the same language support. Because the worst thing is saying, oh, jump to def works for me, or it compiles for me, but it doesn't for your teammate. Or think of those times when a new teammate starts and it takes them 2 or 3 days to get everything set up on their machine. That is such a pain. And Language Server Protocol has a way to help with that, where the language intelligence, the language analysis works everywhere across all of the tools that you use. It's a standard protocol. There's not a lot of really complex configuration required for it, so that you, as the person setting up Che for your team, or as the team lead, can add stuff with the stuff you'll see next about embedding Che configuration and language server configuration in the workspace in the repository itself. And that's going to work for the code host you use, the editors you use. Sourcegraph is going to be able to pick that up. And you're never going to have to spend 2 or 3 days setting up a new teammate. You're never going to have to troubleshoot or pair program with a teammate and realize they've been running without jump to definition, and they've been operating at far below efficiency for a long time. So LSP is a tremendous boon for Che, and that's why Che was one of the things that one of the people that invented the language server protocol, along with Microsoft and Red Hat. Codenvy has played a huge part in this, and we at Sourcegraph are really excited to be adding support for a lot more languages and to get this in Che and all of the other tools that will be used. So I posted some links. I will post another link to the Sourcegraph Go language server so that you can check out the source code for that if you want to see what does it take to add support for a new language. But again, you probably won't need to do that. You'll be a beneficiary as a user. So stay tuned, because you're going to hear about how you can make it much easier to embed configuration in the repository and the workspace itself. This ties into language support. It also ties into making it so that everyone on your team can use Che, and that's the talk coming up right after me. So again, I'm Quinn. I'm from Sourcegraph. Thanks for following, and I look forward to seeing you all again in a year and 2 years, when by then language server protocol will be so obvious, everyone will be using it, and there's going to be support for every single language, which means Che has world-class support for every single language that you use. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Quinn. This concludes our presentation from Quinn on the language server protocol. Josh will be hosting Host Any Project in Che with Martin from Bitnami.